Welcome to our screencast, What are Text-Dependent Questions? My name is Emily Hofer, and I'm the Director of Literacy Best Practices at the Achievement Network. Our objectives for this screencast are to understand why text-dependent questions are important and to be able to identify text-dependent questions. Our intended audience is any teacher or leader interested in learning more about text-dependent questioning. Our content is most applicable to those who teach or support grades 2 through 8. Here is our agenda for this screencast. We'll begin with some background information, then we'll move on to identifying text-dependent questions before wrapping up by pointing you towards some resources and suggesting a few next steps. On your screen, you're seeing the three big shifts in Common Core literacy. We will be focusing on the second shift during our time together today: reading, writing, and speaking grounded in evidence from the text. These three shifts derived from the Common Core standards themselves. So let's look now at the standards to help us understand more about what they call for. On your screen, you're seeing the 10 anchor standards for reading. Remember, these anchor standards tell us what students must know and be able to do at a high level in reading. Let's look more closely at Anchor Standard 1. Anchor Standard 1 gives us an overview of the need to ground in evidence from the text. Pause your screencast now to read this Anchor Standard. The authors of the Common Core standards didn't stop here, though. We also have helpful vertical progressions that outline what students need to know and be able to do at every grade level for Anchor Standard 1. On your screen, you're seeing the vertical progression for Reading Standard 1 for literature. Pause your screencast now to read through this vertical progression to see how the expectations for students evolve over time and consider, how does text-dependent questioning connect with Standard 1? The unique thing about Standard 1 is that it should actually underlie all text-dependent questions. No matter what other standard your questions may relate to, they should always direct students back into the text to cite evidence to support their answers. Now let's talk about what text-dependent questions are. On your screen, you're seeing an excerpt from the Aspen Institute on Text-Dependent Questions. Pause your screencast to read this excerpt. So our goal with text-dependent questions is not for them to be random questions about the text. Instead, they should be crafted to help students make meaning of complex texts. Finally, I'd like to note that text-dependent questions should not operate in a silo. While we won't go deep into this idea during today's screencast, I'd like to point out that a deep understanding of the text you're using for instruction and of the text qualitative complexity will help you make decisions about where to spend your time doing close reading and which text-dependent questions to prioritize asking. For now, let's zoom in and talk about a small piece of the puzzle: how to identify text-dependent questions. In order to identify what a text-dependent question is, let's take some time to name characteristics of both text-dependent and non-text-dependent questions. Pause your screencast now to read through the table on your screen and consider, what is new to your understanding of text-dependent questioning? On your screen, you're now seeing two questions that you could ask about the novel Little Women. Pause your screencast to read these questions and consider, how are these questions different? You can see that the question on the right can be answered without even reading the text, so this is an example of a question that is not text-dependent, whereas the question on the left would require a student to go back into the text to answer it. With Common Core, we're making the shift toward asking more questions like the text-dependent one you see on the left. Now, let's practice identifying text-dependent questions. Pause your screencast now to read the questions on the screen and determine which are text-dependent. Hopefully, you selected these questions as text-dependent. They require students to have read the text and go back to cite evidence to answer them. One final note about text-dependent questions. They aren't just for reading teachers. Text-dependent questions can and should be leveraged throughout the content areas. Click on the pop-up on your screen now to watch a video of text-dependent questioning in action in a math classroom. Now I'll share a few resources with you and then name some suggested next steps. The first resource to share is a lesson bank from Student Achievement Partners that contains close reading lessons with lots of excellent examples of text-dependent questions. Click on the pop-up on your screen now to access this resource. The second resource I'll share is a 2-for-1, the Basel Alignment Project and the Anthology Alignment Project. Both contain teacher-created text-dependent questions that align with Basel and Anthology readers. The Basel Alignment Project is for grades 3 to 5, and the Anthology Alignment Project is for grades 6 to 10. Click on the pop-ups on your screen now to access these resources. The last resource I'll share is one from the Achievement Network. On My ANET Online, you can access a list of question stems that align with each grade level standards guide. These can be a helpful tool to have available as you're writing your own standards-aligned text-dependent questions. I'll end our screencast by sharing a few next steps that we recommend. Pause your screencast to read through these suggestions. If you're interested in a great article about text-dependent questions, our fourth suggested next step, click on the pop-up on your screen now to access one from the Aspen Institute. As we conclude our screencast, I'd ask you to pause and consider what next steps you will take to continue your work with text-dependent questions at your school. Thanks for joining us for this screencast.